I'm about to demonstrate matting and framing works on paper. So first a few things that I'll go over in general. When you look at a framed work of art, there's a couple of things you don't notice. For instance, the mat is totally neutral. It's white, like the paper is white. You should never mat serious art in any color. Sometimes you'll go into a gallery and you'll see a scene like this matted in green with a blue border. That's decorator art. That's to go with the couch. Real fine art is always matted with a neutral tone, usually the color of the paper. There are instances when photographs are matted in gray or black, but no color. And if I use buff paper, I would mat it in a buff color, just off-white. So that's one thing. Another thing, just to say right at the beginning, is another thing you don't notice is that these proportions are not all equal. Usually the top and the sides are equal, but the bottom has an extra ½ inch because the bottom takes the visual weight of the image. So it's kind of an unconscious thing, but it's very important to have, in this case, 3, 2½, 2½, 2½. Another very important thing when you frame. These are metal section frames, and I'm going to show you how to assemble a black one. Silver is perfectly acceptable too. They're made by Nielsen, and you can order them from Dick Blick, like everything else in the world. This is the correct way for them to be on the back. The only correct way is wire going from side to side. I'm going to show you some incorrect pieces. Never just go to Michael's and buy a cheap frame like this. The glass is real, but this is cheap plastic. Look at it. It just kind of goes up and down. We don't accept work with this kind of hanger, ever. This kind of hanger will not stay on the wall securely, and so don't buy that kind of frame. This is another very cheap frame. It might look good, and this is from Blick, but this is even worse. This sort of hanger is literally the worst you can get. Oh, the sawtooth ones are also terrible. Anything but a wire from side to side will not be accepted to a Nazareth exhibition. Now, by the way, this thin frame is considered a modern contemporary frame. You really don't want a thick frame, again, from Michael's. Don't do it. Okay, so all that's out of the way. I've got a white mat board, an off-white piece of paper, close enough. And the first thing I've got to do is measure what size this should be so I know what sort of frame to order. So I'm going to look at this, and if I go about 2½ inches on top and 3 inches on the bottom, I'm at 14. Then I'll turn it to the side, and I want to have something like 2½ inches on the side. So if I have 2½ inches on the side, I get to 15. So That's why I measured this in advance, and I've got frames, two, okay, they come in pairs, a pair of 15 inches and a pair of 14 inches. That's what we're going to need to frame this. But first we have to mat it. So I know the size of my mat is 14 by 15. So I'm going to use a very light pencil. This is an HB pencil. You could use a 2H or 4H. And I'm going to trim this down to 15 by 14. I try to make as few marks as possible because you just end up erasing whatever stays on. So there's my 15. And here's the 14. By the way, this is 4-ply mat board. Mat board comes in 2-ply and 4-ply. You always want to use 4-ply. It's the thicker of the two. So 4-ply mat board. You make this cut with a standard utility knife. Match up your two dots. And don't try to do it all at once, just score it a couple of times. Needless to say, watch your fingers. I'm using a very thick yardstick, more than a yardstick, and that's going to keep me safe. Don't use a thin metal ruler. I want to keep this, you'll see why. I'm going to need that later. So when I trim this, I'll be down to 14 by 15. I'm doing all of my cutting on 1 or 2 layers. It's better to have 2 layers of corrugated cardboard, especially if you do this on a good drawing table or a desk. Have at least 2 layers of corrugated cardboard so that because the knife will cut right through it. So it's very important to do this on corrugated cardboard. It's a lot to remember. Okay, now when I put this on here, it looks like it's going to fit very nicely. So I have to remember what I did, which was 2.5 here, 3 here. I think I want a little less than 2.5 on the sides. Yeah, I want 2 3/8 on the sides. Now, that's because you can only buy the frames in full inches. If I could buy 1/2 inches, I would have a little more flexibility. So I'm going to do my sides 2 3/8. All I'm doing is putting a little dot at 2 3/8. I want as few marks as possible on here. So just a little dot, 1, 2, and 3/8. Just a dot. And I'm going to turn it this way. And I know I want 2.5 inches on top and 3 inches on the bottom. So I'll connect my dots. The dots are lined up. And now I'm going to put a little line at 2.5 inches. And I'm going to put a little line at 3 inches. Why a line? Because there's only one outside edge of the line. And I know that's what I have to cut to. So it's not just dots. Again, a line at 2.5 and a line at 3. So that's all the marks I make before cutting the mat. Now I like to cut the mat on the front. There are ways to do it on the back, but I prefer to see exactly what I'm doing. So this is a Dexter mat cutter. They cost about $25, $30. They last you your lifetime. Pretty much beyond that. I'll probably leave this to my kids. Just a joke. But I probably will. It's not it. Okay, whatever. Anyway, okay, I'm going to take this and push it in right at the edge of that line. And then I'm going to take the metal yardstick, again, very thick, put it down, and there's a little gap. You should take a picture of the gap between the blade and the yardstick. So I want the same gap up here. Let me get a picture. I want that same gap right there. It's really an easy thing to do. And then I'm going to take this and stop right at the edge. By the way, Dexter blades insert right into this. Blade comes out. You always want a really good sharp blade. Put it in. Got to expose enough of the blade to cut through the board. So you get to know that kind of thing. Then I'm going to turn it and do my next edge. Everything has to be very clean. The metal yardstick has to be clean. My hands have to be clean. Everything. Okay. Got 2 more cuts to make. And you'll notice if you're 1/100th of an inch off, it won't matter at all. Try not to go past your line though. That will matter. This takes practice. And there's a very easy way to practice. I'm going to take it out. It gives you a nice bevel edge. You want to photograph the bevel there? That's what's called a bevel edge, kind of going down to your image. The way to practice is very simple. Take the inner piece that you're probably not going to use, put a dot here and a dot here, and insert your blade in the first dot, and try to hit the second dot perfectly. Like that. And, well, it's probably 1/1000th of an inch off. You can repeat that exercise, 20 times, and then you'll be pretty good at it. Okay, so now what we've got is, now you check to see if you've done a good job. If you've done a good job, it should look like that. I should mention that when you're framing prints, this is a cardboard print by Daniel Rothenberg. When you're framing prints, you want to leave a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch on the bottom around the image. If I were framing a drawing, I'd go right up to the edge of the drawing. So there are variables for different kinds of work. Now, for both drawing and prints, we want to make what's called a a window mat. So I'm going to take a piece of foam core board and I'm going to cut it the same size as my mat. Try to find a square edge here. That's a good one. Okay, so I'm just going to trace this. And again, I'm going to use the utility knife, cut this. And it really has to be a sharp blade to get a good cut through foam core. Foam core is kind of tricky stuff. So I'm scoring it once, and then with foam core you can go right through the second time. Get that out of the way. Okay, so this is going to fit like this, and the reason it's called a window mat is it opens like this. You can also do a book mat that would open like that. But to take this down, I'm going to take another piece of foam core and put it here, and I'm going to take another piece of mat board and put it under the foam core. Now, why am I doing that? Because to tape it, I want these to be totally even. So I have to have a piece of foam core under the mat and a piece of mat board under the foam core. And I match them up like that. This is the inside of the mat. And I'm just going to get some water on this paper towel. So making sure we're on the front of the mat, I'm going to flip it over. And it's even because the mat board is on a piece of foam core and the foam core is on a piece of mat board, so this is perfectly even. I'm going to use cloth tape because it's acid free and so nothing's going to turn yellow like a piece of newsprint might. And I'm going to put, what I'm doing is putting hinges on the window mat by wetting the back of the tape. And now I'm going to put it down like this, even it up, and press on the top a little bit so that it stays even. And then I'm going to put the artwork into the frame. The mat, not the frame. We're going to do the frame in a minute. And prints, when you mat prints, you always do about 1/4 inch around the edge and 1/2 inch on the bottom for the signature and the edition number and the title. But if I were doing a drawing, I'd go right up to the edge. Okay, so now I want to tape the print into the mat. So I'm going to cut 4 smaller pieces of tape. And I have to weigh this down so it doesn't move while I'm doing this. So I use a dinosaur because there's nothing heavier than a dinosaur. But you could use an elephant, you could, you know. And I'm gonna wet the edges of the tape. And watch what I do. I'll put them under the paper. And push down. So nothing touches the front of the paper. And then I'm going to take the two other pieces and use those to hold this in place. Again, not touching the front of the paper. Maybe touching it a tiny bit. Okay, so I can remove the dinosaur, and that is nicely in the mat. Now you might ask, why didn't I do the same thing on the bottom? Why is it just floating in there? Actually, for works on paper, they expand and contract over time. So it's better to have them floating. Also, works on paper, when you hang them on your wall, don't hang them in direct sunlight, because things can happen. They can kind of fade. They should be in a kind of neutral light. Okay, so now we're moving on to the frame. And the first thing I'm going to do, I've got the 14 by 15 glass, and first thing I'm going to do is clean the glass. When you buy glass from a hardware store, it's always dirty. Never trust it. Some of you might be thinking, why isn't he using plexiglass? It doesn't break. Well, plexiglass is much more expensive, and actually scratches, and there's all kinds of reasons not to use it. Maybe somebody's wondering, how about non-glare glass? Why not use that? That is really expensive and kind of unnecessary. You know, if you become Picasso, go ahead and use non-glare glass. I'm not saying you're not good enough for non-glare glass, but I've never used it. It's just way too expensive. You're artists. Okay, so I've cleaned this glass really well. Now make sure when you clean it that it's not still wet when you put the print face down on it. So put the print on it. I got that together. So now what I'm going to do, open up the frame kits. Got two 14s and two 15s. And don't throw away this, because inside is the hardware you need to put the frame together. And there are directions on the back if you've never done this before. But it's very easy. So I'm going to kind of open this up and that up. The one thing they don't include is wire. They used to give you a piece of wire. They don't do that anymore. So I'll put some wire on. Okay, I'll show you what these are for, but I would never use them. These are terrible things. They actually are so tight. They're like spring clips, and when you go to unframe the work, they will break the glass. So I throw them away, but I'll kind of show you what they're for just in case any of you like breaking glass. So these are going to go in the corners, which I'll show you in a second. Okay. So the frame is going to go like this. And do is take one of the thick ones, one of the thin ones, put them together so that you see the word Nielsen on top, and put them into the corner like that. Take another one, another thick one, another thin one. Thick ones have screws in them. And put it down here. And I'm going to do the same thing with this one. You know, over the years, you can go to a frame shop and they'll do this for you and charge you for something this size. They'll charge you $80 to $100. You can do it yourself for about $20. Over my career, I would say I've saved thousands of dollars because I do my own matting and my own framing. So, you know, you can decide what you want to do, but over a career, it will save you a ton of money to learn to do this. Learning to mat, by the way, I think also helped get me some of my first teaching jobs because I learned to mat when I was in college, and I taught at a camp and made the students' work look really good because I could mat it. And every program I taught in before I got my college teaching job, I would mat the work and people would be impressed and write good letters of recommendation. So, you know, it's a good thing to be able to do this. So I'm going to now turn this upside down and put these two, should lock right in. If you've got foam core and a mat, it should be just the right thickness to lock in nicely with the frame on the outside. And then I'm going to take these things that I've preset and put them in. You may need to loosen the screws like I did on one of them. Then lock everything in really well. This is what it's going to look like. And then you do need a screwdriver. Let's see if these are going to just snap in. I think they will. Yeah, they'll snap in. There are some hangers. These are the hangers for the wire. They're going to go on the sides. There are some hangers that you have to put in advance. But these, I'll show you how to snap them in. So, tighten one edge. Don't tighten it all the way until you know that you're not going to need some on the other side. We're good. Yeah, this is going to fit nicely. One more. This one's a little bit, loosen this a little. Okay, now good. I'll tighten that back. Okay, so now we've got it in the frame. Black is always good, by the way. I know we looked before at a silver. I use either silver or black. They're both kind of neutral. You notice side, top, side, and then the bottom is a ½ inch larger. Actually, if you don't notice it, it's good. So now I'm going to take the two things that the wire will attach to, and in this case, you make sure you're at the top, and you just snap it in, or not. Wait a minute. Yeah, there it goes. And it'll slide up and down, which is good. Okay, so slide this down a little, and this piece of wire will work. Remember, none of those other hanging methods on the cheap frames will get you into a show. In fact, you might get your work in the show, and then if you show up with one of those sawtooth hangers or the other kind that I showed you, they'll say, sorry, take that back. We've done it here. Because the glass breaks, all kinds of terrible things happen with those. Okay, I'm kind of angling this up so I can get it through here. And I like to make the wire very tight. Not a lot of slack there. And you'll see why in a minute. In this case, where there's a ton of wire, we're going to just take it back in the other direction. I could cut it off, but I don't have scissors here, so I'll just do this. Okay, so I like to make it tight because it's gonna have a little give to it, and this is really good for hanging. So here it is, matted and framed, and that's about it. Any questions? Okay.